This is Community Unity Now, the D Tycoon Show. This is Bill Morton, President of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce, and I am Trudy Leong, Administrator of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. Our very special guest today is Jennifer King. She is the Executive Director of the Cook County Department of Human Rights and Ethics. Welcome, Jennifer.
Welcome. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today.
First of all, tell us a little bit about the Human Rights Ordinance and how that applies to Cook County.
Sure, thank you. So the Human Rights Ordinance protects individuals from discrimination and harassment within Cook County. It protects them in the areas of public accommodation, housing, employment, and county services, which is particularly related to those individuals who are trying to access county services and programs. And it's based on your status or membership in a protected class, race, gender, bodily autonomy, a number of other protected classes that we have available.
You're covering a lot of different things with your Human Rights Ordinance alone. How do you do it?
It's a really great question. Our main function is to conduct investigations. So it's based on those complaints that we're receiving from the public. An individual who feels that they've faced discrimination or had their rights otherwise violated will file complaints with us, and our investigators will review that material either through requests for documentation, conducting interviews and such. And so that's one of those functions, and make a determination of whether there's been whether there's evidence that discrimination likely occurred or not. And then we also do training. So which is really a big focus lately, is to get out there in the community and let people know what are their rights and what are their obligations under the law, because we want to mitigate some of this, right? Yes, we can do investigations and we'll do them when they're required, when we definitely need to do so, but we certainly want to get to the point where people are not facing this discrimination, where they're able to have information and be empowered. And then also for the individuals who have obligations under the law so that they can comply, because I think the majority of people do want to do the right thing.
So in other words, you do trainings for the employers, right? So that they won't discriminate accidentally.
Sure. Yes. Employers, also housing providers who have to comply with our protections in terms of individuals who are seeking housing from them or things of that nature.
Very sad that we still need it.
Unfortunately, yes.
Of course. Now, who qualifies for an investigation? If someone has a complaint, what qualifies for an investigation?
Sure. So one, we make clear that anyone has the right to file a complaint with us if they feel that they've faced discrimination or some other violation of their rights. But we do have certain restrictions in terms of jurisdiction and timeliness. So individuals who feel that they face discrimination based on the protections in our Human Rights Ordinance have 180 days from the date to file, from the date that discrimination occurred until the filing date. And then also for those individuals who have faced discrimination, particularly within suburban Cook County, we have a jurisdictional limit. There is an exception to that for individuals who face discrimination in housing based on their criminal background. Even if they're in the city of Chicago, they could file that complaint with us.
So, I guess a pretty simple question here is, if someone is searching for housing, can the person who has the housing ask for a criminal background?
So that's not the process. And that's a great question. I'm happy you asked it. So an individual, a housing provider on the application should not have a question about their criminal background under our Just Housing Amendment, which is what we refer to it as. That's that protection for those individuals with criminal justice involvement. That housing provider should process the application to ensure the applicant meets the other prerequisites. If they do, then they can conduct a background check. It cannot be look at the criminal history more than 3 years back. And then if they find anything, they have to give that the opportunity to the applicant to provide information, resources, things that mitigate maybe that particular conviction history. And then also, just a note, they can only look at convictions. You can't consider arrest, charges, or things of that nature.
Okay.
And so if people felt discriminated inside the city of Chicago, then they have to go to the Chicago Human Rights Commission.
Yes, that's correct. So we have, our peer agencies, City of Chicago's Human Rights Commission, as well as the Illinois Department of Human Rights. Illinois Department of Human Rights and the Cook County Commission on Human Rights have overlapping jurisdiction. So an individual could determine where they want to file between the two. But if an individual has faced discrimination and the conduct occurred within the City of Chicago, except for that exception with criminal history and housing, they would file in Chicago and not necessarily with us.
So do you correspond with Chicago, train with Chicago, work with Chicago?
Sometimes we do. We do have some collaboration, particularly lately, as we are all, the city, the state, and county passed paid leave protections. We've worked with the City of Chicago in doing some joint trainings, which has been really helpful in talking about the jurisdictional differences between our two ordinances, and then also working collaboratively with the city and the state to create a jurisdictional chart to show the differences between the three. And then we also engaged in other outreach activities as well.
So besides jurisdictional differences, is there any other differences between the Chicago Human Rights Commission and the Cook County Human Rights Commission?
Sure. So one particular difference, which I've kind of flagged, is that we at the Cook County Commission have a protection for individuals who are who would face discrimination in housing based on their criminal justice involvement. City of Chicago does not have that protection.
I got it.
How about employment?
In terms of
Discrimination in employment.
So we do have protections for discrimination in employment. Kind of runs the gamut. In that case, though, kind of relating to like the jurisdictional differences, if an individual faced employment discrimination in the City of Chicago, they should file there versus if they faced it while working within suburban Cook County, we would be the place to come.
We heard recently that employers, are they allowed to ask if an applicant has a criminal background? I think I've seen job applications that ask that question, but then I heard an organization say that they're not allowed to ask that question. So are they allowed to ask, and is that discrimination if the employer asks about if the applicant has a criminal background?
So our main protection as it relates to criminal background is in the housing context. We have a limited protection related to employment and criminal history, which we hope to provide more resources and guidance on to the public in the coming few months.
Okay, good, thank you. What about wage and hour violations? Do you have any coverage in that?
Yes. So we have the Cook County minimum wage ordinance, which provides the county sets a tip or a minimum wage for tip workers and non-tip workers every July 1st of the year, which we make publicly available on our website and provide information for employers and employees on that. We do not have a wage theft protection within the Cook County Commission on Human Rights.
So it resets every year,
Yes.
depending upon what?
So it's a calculation. It's based on the greater of Cook County's calculation, the state and federal minimum wage. So this past year, it increased to $14.05 for non-tipped workers, which is that calculation was greater than 14, which is the current state wage. If it were the inverse and the state was at $14.05, then it would have been set at $14.05 as that's the greatest wage.
The greatest one.
Exactly.
For the just housing, how are investigations conducted to make sure that that the violation has taken place?
So just housing, what we see a lot in just housing is our violations kind of on the face. So we see a lot of discriminatory ad complaints where the ad for housing says, I have a unit available or a home available to rent, no criminal background or no criminal history. So that's what we're seeing a lot there. Or I was automatically denied housing based on my criminal history. I didn't have an individualized assessment. I didn't have that time to give more information.
So you find out about these through complaints?
Generally, yes. And then we work with community groups who may make us aware as we're meeting with them of issues that they're seeing a lot in the community. And they're doing a lot of the work too. Hands-on in the community as they're closely tied, a little bit closer tied than we are. And so they might have an opportunity to mitigate some of this where they are maybe negotiating settlement. They offer trainings also for housing providers as well on these protections.
So if the newspaper has the ad, would you also contact the newspaper?
So we would contact the housing provider because they have created that ad to place in the newspaper. So they would be liable for that discriminatory ad.
So the
advertisement.
newspaper may not be liable even though they accepted it.
Right.
Okay.
The onus is on the housing provider.
And if the housing provider no longer discriminates, would they be penalized for having placed that ad, or you just want to make sure that it does not happen?
We do look at, and it's kind of fact-based, right? We would consider, of course, the timeliness of the complaint, when was the ad placed, the harm that was done, things of that nature. Now, we do consider and take into consideration individual respondent or the housing provider here, their intent or attempts to make corrective action. And we also have the opportunity for parties to always enter into settlement agreements. So there might be an opportunity where the two parties agree, okay, a wrong was done here, a violation was made, I would like to make you whole. And if that complainant, of course, agrees to that, then we would not find a violation. We're happy to certainly respect the agreement that the two parties have come to.
We've interviewed a lot of judges on this show, and one thing that they seem to agree on is a settlement is always the better way. Rather than have something on, or it's only for one person and not for another person, an agreement
Yes.
where everyone gives a little something, no one really has to lose.
Certainly, and we've seen a lot of the matters go to settlement, and it's certainly, whether we send parties to formal mediation or our investigators will facilitate settlement, we want the parties to come to an amicable resolution when possible and appropriate.
What about repeat offenders?
There's nothing currently in our ordinance that speaks to, or that we've enforced as it relates to repeat offenders. Our data does not currently, we haven't looked at that necessarily. We haven't seen any trends where
Like maybe
it's
you
the
see
same.
someone who owns a bunch of buildings in a neighborhood and you keep on seeing them over and over again. They keep on going through your system over and over again. Do you see that?
We have not yet. I will note that we're rolling out a new case management system, and we're really focusing on greater data collection so that we can look at those trends, because we do want to be a little bit more strategic in our enforcement of these protections and ensuring that if we see, okay, this same company is violating the same provision over and over again, what can we do to kind of stop this a little bit further?
Right. And so it is a financial hit, right? For
Yes.
them. It's a monetary punishment.
Yes, there are fines
Civil.
under the ordinance, as well as if the matter goes completely through our investigation process, the commission could also order damages be paid to the parties.
Okay.
Let's touch briefly on the ethics side of the department as well. So does that cover the ethics of the public elected officials for Cook County?
Yes, it applies to our elected officials, our appointed officials, as well as our staff within Cook County.
Tell us about that.
Sure. So our ethics ordinance, and our goal, of course, is to maintain the public trust and integrity of the work that we're doing for the good of Cook County residents. And so we do trainings, we provide advice to our staff and elected officials and appointed officials and other stakeholders as well, and conduct investigations when necessary also, which would come with a fine if there's a violation that has been found. And so we work, there are some major provisions, which I could go through them, but it's generally just ensuring that we're doing our work with integrity. We're not allowing any outside influences to interfere with the work that we're doing or otherwise, make you biased in the decisions that you're making for the public.
And those are Cook County elected officials, or is that?
Only Cook County elected officials. So elected officials
Suburban
for
Cook County.
municipalities. Yes.
Okay.
Well, yes, our commissioners, our individually elected, so our treasurer, state's attorney, et cetera.
Board members too, if they are any boards that are in the county, right?
Yes, our appointed board and commission members.
Okay. And then usually, are there many investigations is there like an inspector general that have investigators, or do investigations only start upon a complaint?
So there is an IG office. We have overlapping jurisdiction with them as it relates to the ethics ordinance. And then our complaints, our investigations can start either by request. So an individual may request that we open an investigation, which we will determine if it falls within the scope of our work. If there's evidence to show that there's a need for an investigation in that matter, and then also within our own initiative, if we see something or whether it's a news article or something else that comes up maybe in the course of our work otherwise, then we can go to our Board of Ethics and open it.
Do you very often get complaints and requests for investigations from constituents of the elected officials?
So no one notes necessarily, so you can submit an anonymous complaint, and so it really just depends. They might not identify themselves as necessarily a constituent of the official that they're requesting an investigation of. They can also request investigations of individual employees as well.
And when an individual or a constituent complains, do they go to the department or do they go to the IG? Where do they go if they want to complain?
They can choose where to go since we have overlapping jurisdiction with the IG in that area. So it just is up to them and kind of where it falls.
And is it? I know that the public of when people run for election, they have to sign this long document about whether they have any connections with any vendors or whatever, or have family members who are vendors of Cook County or something like that. If isn't it? And then if
Conflict of interest.
conflict of interest and ethics form, yes. So. Are those the only things that pertain to a violation of ethics with what they sign on their form?
So there's a number of things as it relates to ethics. So related to conflicts of interest. So if an elected official, an appointee, or a staff member or employee otherwise of the county has a conflict of interest, everyone has to disclose that, and it has to be solved, right? There has to be a resolution for it. At the employee level, that is handled by their supervisor. If it is an elected official, they report that or disclose it to the department, and then they note the action that they've taken to resolve it.
I've always wondered what the action would be to resolve a conflict of interest with a public elected official.
Sure. So one example, I think probably the easiest one that comes to mind, if a matter comes before the Board of Commissioners for a vote, like maybe a contract for them to approve that is of a substantial amount, if that particular elected official says, I have some connection to this company, they will make that disclosure
They
or
recluse
decide.
themselves
Exactly.
from the vote. I've seen that before.
Yes, that is the most probably common way that we see that. If there are, I can only think kind of now, employees who are working on matters where they may have a conflict, they'll recuse themselves and otherwise kind of be shielded from that project.
And that would be the end of the matter. It's okay to just recuse yourself and then do other business, right? It's
Absolutely. And then also disclose it, right? So not just taking the action, but being very transparent about the action and the necessity for it.
Does that often happen?
It happens. It's happens within kind of the regular course of matters that you're dealing with. I can't say a number of how often it happens, but
It seemed kind of common. I'm not going to say which boards, but I've been in a lot of meetings, a lot of boards within the city of Chicago. I've heard someone say, "Well, I'm going to recluse myself because of this.
yes.
I have a family member, or I have a stake in this, or whatever. So I'm going to sit out on this one,
Yes.
and I'm not going to provide my opinion."
Yes. And in those cases, often, especially on a vote, you are making that clear on the record, but not always like sending that report to ethics. And that is completely fine so long as you are putting it on the oral record. I'm recusing myself because of this matter and I'm voting present. That's sufficient.
When people submit complaints, do they have to provide evidence to when you receive complaints? What does the constituent provide evidence? Do you need enough evidence before you start an investigation? How would you proceed?
So on our ethics side, we don't necessarily require that evidence is provided. So we will review the complaint, whatever information we can use from there to figure out, where can we collect additional information to make a determination of kind of what's happening here and whether there's enough information or a basis to open an investigation. So there's no requirement. It is certainly helpful that the more information that you provide is helpful to us to kind of do our due diligence.
And the city of Chicago, they have their own Department of Ethics, right?
Yes, they have their own Board of Ethics.
Board of Ethics, okay.
Different thing altogether.
Or is it the same thing? It's just a different jurisdiction?
Yes, we have a lot of the same protections within the city of Chicago and Cook County.
When let's get back to the services. We work a lot to help people with disabilities get accessibility. What does the Human Rights Ordinance do to help people with accessibility?
Sure. So if we have protections for individuals who are requesting public accommodations, so certainly if they say, like, I was not allowed to maybe bring my service animal into this particular establishment, they can file a complaint and note that their rights were violated there. So there's kind of a number of ways. We see some complaints for individuals who are living in particular housing units who allege, I needed this particular accommodation for the habitability, and they will file a complaint with us there.
We only have a couple minutes left, but what about an example where you have a 5 or 6 story building and the elevator's been broke for 2 weeks and they can't get the part and it's going to be another 2 months to make the part?
So generally those matters would fall under our Cook County landlord and tenant ordinance, which relates to the kind of the other habitability of the actual building, like the elevator doesn't work, my water isn't, working, or I guess water doesn't work, but I don't have hot water or something like that.
And there's someone
right?
with a disability on, like, say, the 5th floor.
We'd have to look at it. If an individual is like, I'm facing discrimination based on the fact that I have a disability, they could file the complaint with us, and we will review it to determine, one, certainly if it's within our jurisdiction, and then also, two, if there is something that we can do, whether it's providing them with other resources or even working to facilitate some sort of resolution for them, our investigators will do that.
Okay.
And maybe there's enough time for one more quick question. Bill and I are election judges, and then our precincts, they say that all the precincts are inaccessible except for 2, but that's not true. Almost all of them are accessible, and I think that oftentimes people with disabilities they refrain from going to vote because they see on the map that
That there are only 2 when all of them are accessible. And so that's something that we found in our experience.
And we've complained about it, and then nothing is done. It's always the same.
So that would not be under our jurisdiction. But I'm happy to chat more about that to see if we can facilitate or connect you with someone that can help with that.
Okay, Jennifer, could you give our viewers how they could find more information about your department?
Or file an investigation.
Yes.
Sure. So we are always happy to speak with anyone, of course, by calling us at 312-603-1104, and then also connecting with us by email at Cook County Human Rights, and we can follow up too with the exact email address. I don't want to mess it up there.
Sure.
And then also visiting our website, of course, just entering a quick search of Cook County Human Rights Commission will take you right there. We have a number of resources, whether there are more information about the ordinances that we enforce, other documents that you need, and a human rights complaint form that you can file.
Can I get your phone number one more time?
Sure, 312-603-1104.
And this has been Jennifer King. She is the Executive Director of the Department of Human Rights and Ethics in Cook County. This is Bill Morton, President of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce, and I am Trudy Leong, Administrator of the Rogers Park Chamber of Commerce. And thank you so much for watching Community Unity Now, the D. Tycoon Show. See you again next week.